Alright folks, welcome back to the channel. So I'm going to discuss my experiences with Crisis Core Final Fantasy 7 for a bit. Let me just start by saying I'm not the biggest Final Fantasy fan in general. However, I absolutely love Final Fantasy 7. And it was the only really Final Fantasy game that kind of clicked with me. I played 10 and I actually beat 10, but it's not something I ever want to revisit. I also tried Final Fantasy 8 and I could not for the life of me get into it. I tried 2 or 3 times to get into it. I just couldn't stomach the story. I thought it was god awful. So, I mean, the story always clicked with me in Final Fantasy 7, and it is the only title I've really revisited. And I've also beaten the remake. I actually enjoyed the remake, and I know some of the mega fans didn't like how the story of the remake ended. And it didn't really bother me all that much, to be honest. And again, I think the original game and the remake can stand out on their own, and that's totally fine too. Now, let's talk about Crisis Core. I've never actually played this, by the way. I know a lot of people probably know the story already. I didn't, to be honest with you, and somehow I managed to avoid some of the spoilers in relation to that. Now, I kind of know what happens at the end, because pretty much Zack's fate, you already are aware of it in Final Fantasy 7, so without saying anything further, I do know what ultimately happens at the very, very end. I'm about 50% through the game. I looked up how many chapters there are. I think there's like 14, and I'm on chapter 7, so 50% of the way there. I think its greatest strength is how it backfills some of the missing elements from the story in Final Fantasy VII in how Soldier was created, some more in-depth look at Sephiroth, Shinra, how the soldiers are formed, created, how they become monsters per se, and I think that's great. It gives further depth to the characters in the entire Final Fantasy VII universe. And that ultimately leads you knowing even more about Cloud, who's the lead protagonist, obviously, of Final Fantasy VII. And it kind of makes me feel a little bit bad for Sephiroth. I never thought I would say that, but, you know, I always thought he was a CUNT. But, yeah, there's a reason he becomes a CUNT. Anyway, I won't say much further than that on the story. Let's move into the graphics and the gameplay. Now, you know me, I've had this discussion before about remakes, remastered. I think Crisis Core has a lovely entry point. What I mean is, price-wise, I only paid like 35, 40 euros for this, and I think it launched at that price too, if I'm correct. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I know it wasn't the full RRP, which is great because you're not paying that full bang 70 euros, and especially for people who are looking to double dip. So as for the graphics themselves, this isn't a half-baked remake, remaster, it's kind of a middle ground, but my understanding is they've done new textures, new models, and it looks fantastic on my big TV on the PS5, can't complain. Sputter smooth 60 FPS gameplay, so no issues there with the graphics and the audio as well. I believe some of the soundtrack has been remastered as well, so I love the soundtrack. I love the variations on the original Final Fantasy VII material, so really, really good. And the voice acting, I can't complain. It's solid and it holds up. My understanding as well, the voice actors of Cloud and Sephiroth in particular are the same ones in the remake as well. Now onto the actual gameplay itself. I find it's a very, very straightforward action RPG so far. It's really point A to point B. There's not that much exploration, and to be honest with you, I'm okay with that. I'm actually really enjoying the linear structure, and it boils down to, as I said, point A to point B, and when you get to point B, you unlock another story beat, and I'm invested in the story. I think that's most important here. I don't think you would get as much enjoyment out of this game if the Final Fantasy VII universe is not something that you enjoy. I don't think jumping into this game would change that in any way. The other thing is, I actually really like the combat system. Now, I suppose because I played the remake before I've played Crisis Core, what I would say is it feels like it's heavily influenced by the remake's combat system, but that's not really true considering that the PSP game original came out first. Again, I'm really just here to share my experiences with this, and from looking it up as well, my understanding that the game directors actually kind of had a hybrid system between what the remake plays like and what the original PSP plays like. Essentially, it's a live action game in essence. It feels a little bit like a bit of a Devil May Cry at times, because you've got a roll mechanic, you've got a guard mechanic, and you've got your basic attacks, which you can pull off various combos, etc. And then you can blend in and mix in your magic attacks and your summon attacks, which is really, really cool. There's also a leveling up mechanic and leveling up your abilities and your materia, something akin and similar to Final Fantasy VII, the original if you played it, but obviously not being a turn-based RPG. There's also a materia fusion mechanic that I really like, that you can blend different materias and items together to form new ones, which is cool, keeps the combat varied, and you can actually create your own unique style. I actually like the melee attack style better than the actual all-out magic, so that's kind of the way I have structured my character at the moment. Now, you can do side missions off the basis of the core missions, and they're done through the save menu. They're all fairly basic dungeons, to be honest with you, where you eventually unlock an item, you fight a couple of bad guys, and you find a couple of item chests. But there's a lot of heavy content there if you want it, but only if you want it, which I do like as well. If you want to just solely focus on the story, which primarily is what I'm doing, maybe the odd side mission just to get an item or a summon material that I'm looking for specifically, but for the majority of the time it's never ever forced on you, which I can really respect. Overall, what I would say is this is one for the Final Fantasy VII fanboys. I think they'll get the most out of it. I'm not so sure about folks who are just general action RPG fans. There's a solid combat system here, but I do think the story is probably its strongest aspect. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.